What's up, everybody? I'm Chris Dailey, founder of the Sports Court, joined here by a man who has taken the sport of lacrosse by storm, knack for net, and a knack for silky smooth moves. So, Jules Heningburg, thank you so much for joining the show.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be on here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure. So, Jules, you grew up in Maplewood, a town I'm very familiar with. However, you didn't. How'd you get into lacrosse? Because I know Maplewood High School has had lacrosse since 1957, which is one of the longest in the state of New Jersey, but lacrosse didn't really surge in popularity until about 10 years ago.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing the research there. I think not a lot of people realize that in terms of the history of Maplewood and the high school. So I'm from Maplewood, but our high school is Colombia High School, and there they had the club program, the Maplewood Lacrosse Club, which kind of before high school sports were sanctioned, you oftentimes have that. You see that sometimes in Utah still, Oregon, some of those states out west where the club programs are, the main facilitator of the high school sport. And that's how it was in New Jersey too. So that being said, the programs Maplewood Lacrosse Club and Montclair Lacrosse Club were two of the oldest ones. Little pockets across the Northeast where lacrosse is really popular. One of those towns, for instance, would be like Yorktown, up in New York, and they just have a lot of history and culture. And I don't think people realize that Maplewood has that as well to a certain extent. I don't think we're as popular, in terms of the recruits and some of the players we've sent off. But if you were a young player growing up in Maplewood, at least when I was growing up, and I know my brother's the coach at the high school now, and he's really trying to revitalize this, but when I was growing up, you just naturally, gravitated towards lacrosse. Someone was kind of just always saying to you, hey, go play lacrosse, go do the spring sport, don't play baseball. And, that was no different for me. In second grade, I started to play, so I was 7 years old. And my dad actually was around a lot of those guys that popularized the sport in the late 70s and won a lot of state championships at Columbia High School. So he was always around the game and always loved it and, always knew the history of the sport in terms of its indigenous roots. And it was something he just was really excited for me to become a part of. And I'm happy that he pushed me because I didn't want to play at first. I was really nervous because I was a basketball player and I was like, I have no idea what this sport is. I'm going to suck. So I'm really happy he did that.
Yeah, well, it turned out pretty well for you, and you were always on the smaller and skinnier side, something I can relate to as well. So what adjustments did you have to make in order to succeed as you got into a higher and a higher and a higher level?
Yeah, I think when I was really young, I was just growing pretty slowly in terms of my size, especially just being a skinnier player. So I always felt like I was kind of behind the eight ball and needed to make up for it, which is being tougher, being smarter, working on my athleticism as best as I could as a young fellow growing up. But I think being able to play with my older brother, who was bigger than me, 2 years older, stockier, just a much thicker guy overall, our body types are very different. He would beat me up in the backyard playing pickup hoops, doing anything we're doing back there. And then I was fortunate enough in our town, they used to run this camp, which it's still run actually on LBI, the David Brothers All-Star Lacrosse Camp. And that was sort of, I felt like if you got to go to that and play with the older guys, you were just one of the guys. And when you were younger, if you got pulled up, it meant that you sort of had this trajectory to go play at Columbia and start on varsity potentially as a freshman. So when I was in fifth grade, I got pulled up to the high school section there, and that was when, the first time I really got to go against older guys, being an 11, 12-year-old kid playing against 18-year-old men and 17-year-old guys. It was a great experience for me, and you get beat up, but you take your punches, and you really learn how to, just be slippery and move off guys and keep yourself safe out there. But also, when you go back to playing your own age, you're like, hey, this guy's nothing compared to those older guys.
Yeah, that's a great story. I can't believe my sister's a fifth grader just playing against high school kids. And I was watching a video about you, and the reason you did that is because you trained a lot. I saw you always hit the ball against a certain wall next to a shop, and one time you hit the window, and they still haven't fixed the window. So if you just want to go over that story and what that was about.
Yeah, so across the street from my house, there's a couple of walls, but when I was young, real young, we had a house next to us, so there was just kind of this big parking lot, and there was a house in the middle of it, and they eventually built a Walgreens there. But before I get to that, there was a wall across the street from my house. It's called Woolly Fuel. It's just not a car dealership, but they do a lot of oil and, a lot of stuff as far as those things go, and just fueling the town. But they have a brick wall outside the spot, and there's a glass window next to the wall. So I would always go out there. I remember specifically during the national championship, Syracuse, Cornell, at halftime, I would run out, there and play wall ball just because I was like, this is so cool watching this. And I know the only way I can get there is if I improve my left hand. That was what my coach would always tell me. Steve Ramos, who ran the Maplewood Lacrosse Club, he's like, you got to do twice as many reps with your left hand than you do with your right hand. And I would just be out there all the time hitting the wall. And oftentimes I would get a little reckless and just pop the ball through the window, and it would break it, and I would just dip out of there as fast as possible before they could come out and see. They always sort of knew it was me, and then eventually, they came to my house and knocked on the door and told my dad, and I was really scared after that. But I always kind of just made sure I went over there after it was closed, because they tried to tell me that I couldn't come anymore during work hours because of the banging on the wall. And then fast forward, they were getting upset enough that I was like, fine, I'll go to the new Walgreens that's next door, which they would leave the light on after Walgreens would close at 10:30, and that would be on until like 1 o'clock in the morning. So it was always easy for me to be out there whenever I needed.
That's great. And just a quick question. I don't know if you're frozen, but I can only see like your face is like frozen. I don't know if I'm frozen, but
yeah. I will. Hold on 1 second.
All right, it's all good now.
Good?
Yeah, I was just making sure. All right,
so sorry about that.
No, it's all good. It happens a lot. So you mentioned a lot of recruits not really coming out of Maplewood, and it's definitely very hard to become a top recruit. So you were an unranked recruit coming out of high school, which is crazy to see where you are now, and you attended Rutgers University where my brother goes, so go Knights, where you had a great career.
There we go.
Yeah, you had 60 starts and you put Rutgers Lacrosse back on the map, back into the national scene. What was your recruiting process like at Rutgers, and overall, how was your college experience there?
Yes, I think coming out of Maplewood, it's definitely, I don't think as prominent, like I was kind of saying before, as some of those other towns, like a Yorktown, like a Garden City in Long Island, like some of those MIAA schools in Baltimore. You don't have as much of a pipeline. And what I mean by that is oftentimes coaches will go to the well for recruiting. So there's, not that many resources in lacrosse compared to, the other big sports like a football or basketball where you're going to find the recruits no matter what. In lacrosse, you're going to go back to the areas because it's easy to hop on the phone with that coach that that player is going to, have a certain level of athleticism, a certain level of lacrosse IQ because those programs are consistently turning those guys out. So I was already kind of behind the 8 ball a little bit in terms of that coming out of Columbia High School. And then I didn't start playing club lacrosse until 9th grade. And at that point, I didn't realize that the recruiting cycle had been sped up. These are not things that you're not getting email blasts about them. And we didn't have social media as much to talk about, the recruiting period, the dead periods, all these things you see on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok now. So, if you wanted to get recruited, you had to be on a certain club team in New Jersey. You had to be playing club lacrosse at a certain summertime, point. And I just didn't know that. So I think I definitely missed the 8 ball there and was behind a year in my recruiting from that standpoint. But I always felt like I stood at a certain level across the board with some of the kids I was playing against in New Jersey, being able to play up versus older guys and seeing how I could compete versus them. And then I think, even seeing the guys that committed after I was a sophomore, I did my rising freshman summer. I played club lacrosse, but it wasn't on a team like Leading Edge, one of the best teams in the state. That was the team I knew I needed to play on to get recruited. But and I eventually did play on them. But prior to that, I wasn't on a team that was really showcasing me to get recruited. It was more to just play lacrosse and to play with my brother. Again, playing up versus older kids. So I was a 9th grader playing versus 11th, 12th graders, not standing out all the time, but holding my own and having an amazing chance to improve and play against older guys. And that following fall, I remember I was sitting in class. It was my sophomore year, and I just, at that point was on Twitter. And I remember I saw guys start to just, say, hey, I verbally committed to Johns Hopkins. I verbally committed to Duke University, all these schools. And I was like, these coaches don't even know that I exist yet. And funny enough, my dad actually texted me when I was talking about it because he didn't really know either. And he was like, maybe it's the best route for you to just go play Division III, if all the scholarship spots are taken. And I was like, yeah, maybe I'm just going to end up being a Division III player. And it sucked because I was like, I didn't even get a chance for them to see how good I was or not. So luckily enough, the following summer I played for Leading Edge Lacrosse Club going into my junior year. And, at that point, I had a, big chip on my shoulder from that previous summer and seeing those guys get recruited. And I knew where I stood as a player. I felt skill-wise and athletically, IQ-wise, and just kind of what I brought to the table. And I showed up that summer and competed as hard as I could throughout that summer and was lucky enough to get recruited by a number of schools. None of the top tier schools, when I would consider as far as ACC and Big Ten go. But, I think I got recruited by a number of solid universities. And I also believe I wasn't the best player on the circuit. A lot of players fit that mold better than I did. And I wasn't ever going to take someone's spot on the circuit either. You see some guys flip their recruitments, and you see some players kind of commit late because a coach, geez, he's so outstanding. I don't think I was that good at the time. And I think I had a lot of potential. I was still skinny, but I was tough. I played hard. I was high IQ. I was a playmaker. And I know Coach Brecht from Rutgers saw that in me and believed that I had a trajectory to come to Rutgers and change the program. And that's what he recruited me to do. And I took that really personally just because of my trajectory in the sport and, what I felt was, what I deserved to do. So I was really excited to commit to Rutgers going into my junior year. And then after that, I ended up transferring to Seton Hall Prep as well.
Yeah, and it's amazing because you go to Rutgers and you really just run with it there, and you do amazing. You were an All-American, 2-time All-Big Ten, and right after Rutgers, you get drafted 7th overall to the Florida launch of the MLL, and this was right about the time where lacrosse was really taken by storm by the PLL. Mike and Paul Rabil, the brothers there. As Paul is one of the best to ever play the game of lacrosse. So when you got that initial call by Paul, or however you found out about the PLL, what was your initial reaction when you heard about the league?
Yeah, so I was introduced to Paul through Kyle Harrison. Kyle and Paul both watched. They're both very into college lacrosse as Hopkins fans. So they both watched me play my senior year versus Hopkins. I had a big game that game. We lost at the last second, 13-12, I believe the score was. And they are both pretty, I wouldn't say surprised is the wrong word, but pretty excited about the player I was coming out of Rutgers, seeing me play versus their alma mater. And after that, I got in contact with Kyle and he let me know kind of about what was happening with the Premier Lacrosse League. And, I think from there, it kind of just started that relationship. And I personally knew guys that played in the MLL, and I knew a lot about what their experiences were like. And I was excited to get drafted overall, professionally. Just, it's a blessing, and it's what kickstarted my career. But when I got to the MLL, my experience again was not what I felt like the professional lacrosse experience could be like. It was kind of just where the sport was at that point. But I was definitely excited at the same time to know that there was something on the horizon in the Premier Lacrosse League, and definitely believed in that vision. Someone that I think just looks to do things at a high level consistently, no matter what that might be, whether that, be my work, be that on the field, be that the relationships in my life. I just feel like there's a certain level of, professionalism I want to bring to the table and work ethic. And I felt like that's what the Premier Lacrosse League was attempting to do with lacrosse. And, I just could sense that, and I knew that it would take off. And, here we are 3 years later with the leagues merged together and positioned to have the biggest summer in pro lacrosse history.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know, but I think Drew Brees might be on the mic announcing some of your games because I know he just signed to NBC. He's at Notre Dame. I'm a big Notre Dame guy, and they're great at lacrosse as well. So it'll be interesting to see how he does calling some lacrosse games. I know he's a big fan, and he said he would rather have his sons play lacrosse than football. So definitely a big advocate for lacrosse there. And speaking of the PLL, you originally went to the Whipsnakes, quickly traded to the Redwoods, Royal Woods. I'm a fan of them. So you had an amazing you had an amazing season as a rookie. Unfortunately, you lost to the Whipsnakes in the final, really heart-wrenching, close game there in overtime. But overall, how was your experience as a rookie, and what was your favorite stadium you played in? Because I don't know if people know this watching, but PLL is a barnhouse league, which means it's not cities. It's not like the New York Redwoods. It's just city to city to city.
Yeah, my experience, I think, for my first year was amazing. It was definitely really exciting to be a part of the inaugural season. I think that going from MLL to PLL and the jump again in terms of the professionalism and how we were treated, really made it feel like this is something that people were excited to watch on TV, and something that people were excited to be a part of and experience. And that made you feel like a real pro, which was really cool. I think I had a interesting first season getting traded and, stepping onto a new team. So that was, again, another challenge for me, but it was I think, again, a blessing to be traded and go to a team that wanted me and felt like I brought the skill sets to the table that would help that team at that point in time. So, again, I had an amazing run, and I'm excited now to get back there and really chase a championship down, because I think we're definitely due for one.
Yeah, and I spoke about Paul, and it's pretty interesting because he's the owner of the league. He was one of the founders of the league, and he's also a player at the Atlas. So is it interesting playing against him because he's the guy that really brought you to the PLL? I'm just wondering what the guys in the locker room think about that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic. There's not many players, I don't think, in sports history that have done that. I know there's been player coaches before. John Grant was a player coach for the Denver Outlaws. Bill Russell is another famous one that comes to mind for the Boston Celtics. And it's definitely a difficult, I think, thing for him to be able to do and pull off because, he's managing so many relationships and also managing the league as a whole, and then also trying to uphold his level of athleticism that he feels, is what the product that he wants to put out there right at the end of the day. And I think that he's done a phenomenal job in balancing that. I think that it's definitely not easy because, one day you're working on the league side and you have to maintain relationships, and the other day, you go out on the field and you're trying to take someone's head off and you're trying to put the ball in the back of the net. And we're grown men and we're adults, so things get chippy and competitive on the field. So, at the end of the day, that's a hard balance to do, and I don't envy him for having to do that, but I definitely respect the fact that he's been able to, play at the level he has played, and as far as being able to do as much as he does off the field, because I know personally I, barely can stay at the level of athlete I want to be at by just training and being a consistent pro player. The guys that work two jobs and are able to do it, more power to them, because I know I wouldn't be the player I'd want to be. So it's really an amazing feat that I think should be talked about more.
That's amazing. And you play both outdoor lacrosse and indoor lacrosse, which is considered box lacrosse. And I have to ask you, you played for several teams, including teams in San Diego, the Minnesota Wheat Kings, which is semi-pro, and now you're back in New England with the Black Wolves. So what's the difference between outdoor and box lacrosse?
I would say the biggest difference, in terms of the general fan, would be just the overall game in itself is much different how it's set up. We play 5-on-5 in box. You play 10-on-10 outdoors. We have a smaller net in box, a 6x6 outdoors, a much bigger goalie in terms of the space he's taking up in the cage, just with padding and stuff. Much more like hockey indoors. You usually keep the stick in one hand. When I say one hand, if you're a righty, you play on the right side of the floor. If you're a lefty, you play on the left side of the floor. When you're outdoor, you're switching hands. Guys split dodge. Guys shoot down the alley. So there's a lot of differences like that. I think as far as the way the game's played, it's much more similar to hockey in terms of the culture and how guys go about things on the floor. You have to be tough to be able to play box lacrosse because you're constantly battling every single shift. It's a war, and you're fighting to get topside, to get goals. You're fighting to get underneath. You're fighting to stop guys. It's a fight and a battle, really. And I think it actually brings out the history of the game, the roots of the game, more than field lacrosse to a certain extent, as far as that goes. And I know the natives have a huge presence in the box lacrosse space, and really do an amazing job. Some of the greats in the game, like Lyle, like a Randy Stats, like a Cody Jamieson, some of those guys right now still playing. So I think for me, the biggest impact it's had and the best part about it is it's similar to basketball where you constantly have to be alert of what's going on. And I think that is something in field where guys sort of get lazy when the ball is not in their stick and, when the ball is moving around the perimeter, when in reality, you want to be positioning yourself to be a threat, at all times and be ready to set yourself up to be a threat when you do get the ball in your stick. And you have to do that in box lacrosse because there's only really 20 seconds on the clock once the ball gets over. You start playing 5-on-5. And, at any given time, the ball can be swung to you and swung back and then swung back to you. And it happens in a split second. So you have to be on the ball. You have to be ready. And, you're shooting on a smaller net. So you have to be precise. And again, you have to be tough. So you have to be able to use your body. You have to be able to take hits, give hits. And, overall, I think it's a great game. And I really enjoyed my time playing it. And it's definitely improved my outdoor game a lot.
Yeah, and I was talking to my dad the other day. I said, because I know somebody who's a lacrosse goalie, I'm like, that's got to be one of the toughest positions in all of sports. And I'm a big soccer guy, and at the local facility we have, those box lacrosse goalies, because it's inside, absolutely giant. Like all the pads they wear, it's insane. But you don't want to be getting hit with one of those balls by Jules Heningburg here. You have a bit of a rifle. I was watching that at PLL, the All-Star Showcase, kind of like the dunk contest in NBA. And how fast those guys shoot is absolutely insane. So it's really all credit to them, and it's amazing what the sport of lacrosse has done just from 5 years ago to now. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I think even us being on this call right now, the fact that you're excited about the pro game speaks volumes to the growth of it. And I know there's younger players like yourself that are, or not younger players, but necessarily younger fans like yourself that are starting to pick up on the game. And I know 10 years down the line, you'll be able to look back on this conversation and talk about where the sport is and how much growth there really was. So I think it's a phenomenal time to be involved in the game. It's a phenomenal time to invest into it, to become a fan, because it really is, in my opinion, the best game in the world. And I think that we're only going up from here.
Yeah, definitely. And just to end it off here, you recently unfortunately missed out on the season in Salt Lake, Utah, which was at the Real Salt Lake training grounds, which I always love as a soccer fan to see that. But you had coronavirus, you were asymptomatic, but unfortunately you were at increased risk for a cardiac arrest. I know what COVID can do. My dad had it, he had it months ago. He can barely still do yard work now because he gets so out of breath due to underlying conditions due to COVID. So mentally and physically, how big of a toll did this put on you as a person and you on your body?
Well, first and foremost, I would say I'm just sorry to hear about your dad. I hope that his recovery, continues to go well and he's able to get back to,
Thank you.
The physical shape that he wants to be in. I've been there before. I think as far as COVID goes, it's definitely really, I would say the first and foremost, it's really scary as well. It's definitely, no one really knows what was going on. Even to this day, I think there's so many new things that happened with it. At the time, which was, 9 months ago almost, time flies, but it was scary because I got it and I went through the process of having COVID, then was tested to go into the PLL bubble, tested positive for COVID, but had no symptoms. So it was just kind of lingering around. Had to get a number of tests done to return to play, which at that point in time, the PLL was above and beyond other leagues as far as return to play operations went. For a lot of reasons. I think the main reason was they didn't have room for error. If something happened, God forbid, I went on the field and dropped dead, going into cardiac arrest, that would shut the league down. And that would really be lacrosse would be in a bad place after that. So they had to be buttoned up and really tight. I don't think you saw that in other sports. There was a number of football players, a number of basketball players that ended up going to the hospital, ended up having their seasons ended, but it kind of falls through the cracks a little bit because the games are so big. So I'm really grateful for the PLL because at that moment in time, again, return to play was not up to par as it is now, and they had to run me through these tests. So after running me through those tests and kind of doing a number of things there, I was made aware that my oxygen stats, which test how much oxygen is really flowing through your blood at any given moment, were dropping significantly. And what you don't want to have happen is your oxygen stats drop so low that you don't get enough oxygen pumped to your heart. And that's when you can, go into cardiac arrest. So I was at risk for that, especially playing in Utah where the elevation was much higher. It's much harder to breathe. So again, that was a contributing factor there. But even in San Diego where I live, I was having difficulty having my stats maintained to the level that they needed to maintain at. I think that it was really challenging, just because I felt like the moment in time as far as the country goes, as far as George Floyd and the BLM movement went, that was taking a large emotional toll on me, preparing for the season, all the things that I did as far as that went, to make sure that, the players and myself, as far as the BLA go, were positioned to be able to express, our, feelings and, what we felt was most important at that moment in time at the bubble. And I think that coincided with our team because there was a number of hard conversations guys were having across the league and across the country because it was a tumultuous time. And I think all of that played a huge role into how I felt about COVID because I felt like I was trying my best to go out there and just play for something bigger than myself, which I always want to do, but I think at that moment in time, again, it was even bigger. So to not be able to express that in initial reaction was just a lot of sadness. I felt like I let my teammates down in a number of ways by getting it because I know the value that I can bring to the table as a teammate, on the field. And, I always want to be able to be there and play as hard as I can for those guys and, helped us to win games and win a championship. So, all that's to be said. Went through that process and then was sent home and had to support those guys from home and, learned a lot about myself and grew as a person. And I'm just really excited now to have had the offseason I did and be able to come back this season chasing the championship again. I think the Redwoods are positioned well with the players we have and kind of the timeline, and we have to go through a lot of hard teams to get there, but I'm excited for that challenge.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're doing better now. I know Cam Newton, he got COVID. He's in New England as well. I know you played box lacrosse there, and after he got COVID, he was having a pretty good season. I'm not going to say it was amazing, but having a pretty good season, and then he got COVID, and all of a sudden his performance just absolutely dipped a few weeks later. And as you mentioned with the Black Lacrosse Alliance, you're one of the founders of that, so the BLA. If you want to let everyone know what that is and what you're doing there, feel free, and the stage is yours.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. So yeah, we founded the BLA last year, the Black Lacrosse Alliance. It's really the collective group of Black professional players in the Premier Lacrosse League. And hopefully as we continue to grow, can get a lot of those National Lacrosse League guys involved as well. But I think the biggest thing for us is, we have 3 pillars, and our mission, is really to just inspire the next generation of players and build a more inclusive game of lacrosse. I think everyone wants that, and I think that where lacrosse is right now and where we are as professionals and the number of guys we have, it's our responsibility to really uphold, ourselves to a certain standard every day and as we go out there and play. And again, playing for something bigger than ourselves. And I know that the sport needs it. And, we are committed to growing lacrosse at the grassroots level in a number of ways, committed to educating the community in a number of ways, and committed to making sure that the professional game, as it continues to scale and grow, that there are players like ourselves that are going to be able to have the opportunity to play and that we represent the game at the highest level the right way and continue to inspire those kids across the country. So, we're excited to have set a foundation last year and grown throughout this year and be able to go into this season for a tour model. And again, bring that message and, bring that representation to every single weekend. And, hopefully we can look back in 10 years and know that we made an impact on the game and leave it better than we found it.
Yeah, and good on you, doing good on and off the field. And that's about all I have for you, Jules. So thank you so much for joining the show. And to everybody, make sure to tune in to the Redwoods this season on NBC. It's going to be a good season, and I know the Redwoods, I just saw the draft the other day, in a good position, as you said, to win it all. So I'm wishing you the best, both health-wise and on the field.